Good night, everyone. Welcome to Paul 1200. Today's topic is constitutions and the judiciary. A constitution is a set of rules or principles, written and unwritten, relating to the structure, functions, duties, and powers of the organs of the state, their relationship to each other, and their relationship to citizens within that state. In essence, a constitution is a collection of rules which govern the government. The Constitution is what ensures that the government and various institutions of the state adhere to prescribed procedures and processes in the execution of their respective roles or functions. A constitution may be written or unwritten. A written constitution is unique in that it can only be applied within the territorial boundaries of a singular state. It also has supremacy to all other legislation. For example, within the US, a number of states would have legalized the use of marijuana, but it is still illegal under federal law. As such, if you're caught with the substance, you can be arrested and tried under federal law. Unwritten constitutions, on the other hand, are guided by customs and traditions. Unwritten constitutions can therefore be informed by religious texts, statutes, written orders from the Crown in the case of Commonwealth states, as well as international laws and conventions agreed upon by world governments. No constitution is entirely written or entirely unwritten. Some of the unwritten components of written constitutions are the doctrine of rule of law and the doctrine of separation of power. The rule of law refers to governance subjected to or conducted within the framework of the laws of the land and in accordance with general principles that are constitutionally agreed upon and fairly applied to all. The rule of law requires an independent judiciary which is not subjected to undue influences from the political executive, legislature, or private individuals within the state. Effective rule of law also requires a legal system that is democratic both in terms of enacting the laws as well as administering justice. The extent to which the rule of law is developed or the degree to which it is violated therefore has implications for the realization of freedom, equality, efficiency, and stability within democratic societies. Separation of power is premised on the notion that to concentrate more than one function in one arm of government would lead to the violation of human rights and abuses of power. So, to prevent this, the formulation, implementation, and interpretation or enforcement of laws is shared among three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Written components of an unwritten constitution pertain to fundamental human rights. For instance, the Magna Carta is one of the most important documents in British history. It established the principle that everyone is subjected to the law, even the king. The European Bill of Rights is another international convention which is geared at protecting human rights and political freedoms within Europe. It was drafted in 1950 and entered into force in 1953. All European member states are party to the convention, and new member states are expected to adopt the convention at the earliest possible opportunity. Essentially, any person who feels his or her rights have been violated under the convention by a state party can take that state to court. Judgments finding violations are binding on the states, and they are legally obligated to execute those findings. The convention covers a number of contemporary issues within international relations, such as torture, the right to fair trial, the right to privacy, marriage equality, discrimination, as well as the right to religious association. Constitutions can also be codified or uncodified. A codified constitution is one where the rules and regulations pertaining to a singular state is consolidated into a singular document, and that document has supremacy to all other legislation. An uncodified constitution is one where the rules and regulations pertaining to that state is scattered across various documents. Some of the strengths of codification or codified constitution is the supremacy of the law, which we have already spoken about. Another is the entrenchment of main constitutional provisions and principles in relation to powers, functions, structure, and changes to government and various institutions of the state. Power within codified constitutions is given and expressly constrained by the Constitution. For example, the distribution of power between federal and state governments, where federal government is responsible for national security, foreign policy, and economic policy for all 50 states within the US, and they are unable to force states to adopt things such as education policy and healthcare policy, as we would have seen with Obamacare. Power of the legislature is constitutionally constrained as well. They're only empowered to enact laws and not interpret or apply those laws. The power of the executive is constrained, as we would have seen in the case of Trump and his travel ban placed on Muslims, which was reversed by the Supreme Court, granted that it was unconstitutional. Codified constitutions also serve an educational value to members of the state in relation to their rights and freedoms, which in turn helps them to hold the government accountable. Some of the weaknesses of codified constitutions is that it is argued to be rigid, in that it cannot be easily changed. It usually takes act of the legislature, and in some cases the composition or the structure of that legislative branch can prove to be difficult when it comes to compromise and consensus and the decision-making process within that branch. It is also argued to be less responsive or adaptive to changes within society in the case of modern day issues such as marriage, torture, the right to privacy, but nonetheless, most of the courts within contemporary societies tend to take a more liberal approach to those issues. Constitutions can therefore be classified according to its form, whether it's written or unwritten, the ease to which it can be changed, the degree to which it is observed, and essential to that are the independence of the judiciary, the rule of law, and separation of power. It can also be classified according to whether it's federal or unitary, presidential or parliamentary. Federal or unitary speaks to the relationship between central governments and state governments, or central government and local government bodies in the case of Guyana. Presidential or parliamentary speaks to the separation of power between the different branches of government or the different arms of government, or the lack of separation of power between those three branches or three arms. Constitutions may also be effective or nominal. An effective constitution is one which regulates the affairs of the government and its agencies, including how they exercise their power. A nominal constitution, on the other hand, does not necessarily limit the powers of the state or government. Functions of the Constitution. The Constitution has several essential functions. The first one is to empower the state. That is, the Constitution signals the creation of new states. It defines power within a territorial jurisdiction. For example, within a federal state, the Constitution specifies the levels or jurisdiction of power between federal government and state governments. Similarly, the Constitution of a unitary state will specify that sovereign power over the entire state rests entirely with central government, and it will outline what levels of authority or powers are vested with local government units or autonomous bodies. It also creates and empowers institutions of the state. For example, within Guyana, the Constitution empowers the ERC, GCOM, and GRA, to name a few, to execute certain functions or roles on behalf of the state. The second purpose or function of the Constitution is to establish unifying goals or values, and that is done via the application of political ideologies. For example, cooperative socialism within Guyana via the 1980 Constitution, or liberalism, which is enshrined within the US constitutions. The Constitution also provides for government stability. Stability in the sense that the framework of government and its operations are set out, and procedures through which changes can be made are outlined. So there's stability in the sense that the Constitution empowers the state to function within a specific period, 5 years for Guyana. Granted that the government may become unresponsive or ineffective for some reason, it also specifies procedures through which that government can be replaced, and we know those are no confidence motions or prorogation of parliament, and therefore calls for early elections. The Constitution also protects rights and freedoms of individuals within that state. That is, the Constitution establishes as well as protects the rights of individuals within its jurisdiction. This is a check and balance mechanism on the power of, or the limits of, the powers of the government, in the sense that people are made aware of their rights, and to that extent they can help to keep the government in check, or they can help them from overstepping their powers. The Constitution also legitimizes regimes. The Constitution defines the powers of the states and outlines the scope of government authority. It also defines rights, powers, and procedures relating to the structure and the relationship among public institutions, as well as the relationship between public authority and citizens. So, for example, the Constitution is what gives the government the right to make certain rules and regulations on our behalf. The Judiciary. The Judiciary is the branch of government which is responsible for administering the criminal and civil justice system, and in the process, it is responsible for resolving disputes between private individuals within the state, as well as disputes between the state and individuals within that state. This is operationalized by judges who are officers of the court, empowered to interpret and apply the laws of the state. If you're looking to find the sources of authorities of the various courts within Guyana, you can look at Article 123 of the Constitution, and if you're looking to find the scope of authority of the Caribbean Court of Justice, to which we are signatories to, you can look at Article 123, Section 3 as well. Functions of the Judiciary. There are three main functions of the judicial branch of government. The first one is to guard the Constitution. The judiciary is the guardian of the rights of man, and it protects or safeguards these rights from all possibilities of individual and public encroachment. In other words, the judiciary will see that the rights of people are protected. The judiciary also interprets the law. Once the law has been made, it cannot be given any arbitrary interpretation by the political executive. It is up to the legal system via the various courts to decide the meaning of the law. The judiciary also has the power to perform judicial reviews, which we would have seen in the context of our no confidence motion. It would have passed through three different court systems: High Court, Supreme Court, and ultimately the Caribbean Court of Justice. And the third function of the judiciary is to be impartial or remain independent. Despite being a part of government, the judiciary must function independently and in an unbiased manner as it interprets and adjudicates disputes within society, as well as disputes between the state and society. The independence of the judiciary from the executive and undue influence from the legislature, as well as the impartiality of judges, is an important pillar of democracy and is critical to the effective functioning of democratic societies. It is the judiciary and the administration of justice that helps the orderly functioning of democracy and the exercise of powers by various institutions of the state. In theory, the judicial independence is constitutionally guaranteed. It is premised on the separation of power. However, we have to look at how judicial independence is guaranteed within the context of Guyana, where there's a lack of separation of power between executive and judicial branch, legislative branches of government. In practice, judges hold the scales of justice. Therefore, judges should always remain partial or impartial in their role of administering justice. A legal system based on respect for the rule of law therefore needs strong, independent, and impartial prosecutors willing to resolutely investigate and prosecute suspected crimes against human beings, even if those crimes are committed by persons acting within an official capacity. Say, for example, your political executive or your military personnel. Unless judges and prosecutors are able to play their respective roles in maintaining justice within society, there is the risk that a culture of impunity will take root. Additionally, if people encounter problems with securing justice for themselves, they may be compelled to take the law into their own hands, and that can result in further deterioration in the administration of justice, as well as possible outbreaks of violence, all of which has implications for political stability. Some of the issues with the judicial branch. Despite the need for judges, prosecutors, and lawyers to exercise their professional responsibilities in true independence, experience shows that they are often subjected to pressures of various kinds aimed at compromising their ability to do so. Those pressures are both internal as well as external. Some of those internal pressures stem from prejudice, sympathies, personal experiences, and the application of personal ideologies in their judgments. External pressures stem from the executive and legislative branches, as well as pressure from the business community as it relates to bribery in some cases. Ways in which we can mitigate these issues is via the security of service or security of tenureship. That is how long a person is appointed to a judicial position. So, for example, within the US, the Supreme Court judge is appointed for a lifetime. It means, therefore, that he's able to act impartially or he's able to act freely in his administration of justice without fear of being removed when a opposing political party comes to power. There's also commensurate remuneration, that is paying judicial persons or persons involved within the judicial branch of government according to their level of education. Supposedly, this helps to safeguard against bribery, usually found within the judicial system. There's also probity, where judges, prosecutors, and various persons within the judicial system are appointed based on integrity and the strength of their character. So it's based on things such as morality and how well they follow ethical codes of conduct in the administration of justice. Judges may be removed for a number of reasons. They can be removed for their inability to perform their functions. They can be removed for misconduct or misbehavior, as well as persistently not writing decisions or not doing so within their specified time period. The president has the responsibility for establishing a tribunal which is responsible for making decisions on the removal of judges. Are judges political? Well, politics is about the creation, amendment, and maintenance of laws, and judges are the persons who are tasked with interpreting and, in some cases, amending these laws via their rulings. So, yes, they are involved in politics. I think the more essential question is whether or not judges should be allowed to serve within political office as well as on the judicial branch of government, and if they're able to do so, how well can they function? Can we still have the impartiality? Decisions of judges have political impact if we're looking at things such as no confidence motions, presidential term limits, government intervention, as well as the validity of legislation. So for example, we can observe the impact of the ruling of judges when it comes to no confidence motions within Guyana. What impact has it had? Political impact is that the process of governance is disrupted via the ruling. Granted that the no confidence motion is upheld, then it therefore means that we will have to call early elections, and in the context of COVID-19 we've seen how difficult that ruling has been and how the different challenges to the laws by both your incumbent political party as well as your opposition political party in the declaration of elections results. We don't have a fully functioning government, and in some cases it is affecting our ability to effectively address the issue of COVID-19. Do judges make policies? Not necessarily make policies, but I think their decisions can inform the creation of new policies or changes to existing policies. So for example, if we're looking at same-sex marriage, we don't currently have those laws in place. So if it is that an individual within the state is to challenge the government on violating their fundamental right to determine who they want to marry, and the judge is to rule in their favor, then that would lead to the creation of new policies. When it comes to things that are already in place, for instance, the code of conduct or the code of dress within institutions, if it is that you are a male and you choose to wear a dress because you have a different gendered identity to enter some public institution, and somebody says you are unable to do so, and you choose to take the state to court over that issue, and the judge rules in your favor, well, then that can cause that policy to be amended. And the last thing is law versus morality. Is there a place for morality in the application or in the making of laws? Should there be a place for morality? Problematic to some extent. Morality is something that is subjective. Subjective in the sense that morality is based on our personal values or goals. For example, if I'm religious in nature, then my morality will inform how I administer the law if I were a judge. So for example, let's say you're talking about same-sex marriage, and I subscribe to Christianity, and within that ideology, marriage is sacred. It should remain between male and female, and therefore if you're coming before me and telling me that the state is violating your fundamental rights, I might use my moral judgment or my personal bias to inform the decision that I make on that issue. And that brings us to the end of our discussion on constitutions and the judiciary. The next topic is the political executive and leadership, which we will look at next week. Until then, please continue to read the slides and follow the precautionary measures for COVID-19.